Good morning. Welcome to this year's Energy Matters webinar. My name is Denise Weirs. I'm the Director of Corporate Finance here at the Alberta Securities Commission. Each year, the members of our energy group, a team of engineers, geologists, and energy analysts, review the disclosures made by reporting issuers engaged in oil and gas activities. And they prepare a report outlining their findings with a view to assisting issuers in preparing their disclosure. Some of the matters covered in this year's report include guidance relating to royalty interests, independence of qualified reserves, evaluators, and costs incurred. In the last few years, the teams expanded their review to the broader energy sector, and they've included disclosure guidance on a variety of emerging topics, including helium, hydrogen, CCUS, and lithium brine projects. And in this year's report, they've included guidance on renewable electricity projects. The team has also been monitoring the disclosure in relation to sustainability related matters. And they've provided data on that. As well, they've included data on financing activity in the energy sector. That data, together with the feedback we received from consultations, is really helpful for us in relation to our policy-making efforts, including right now in respect of our current consideration of climate-related disclosure. The 2023 report and actually prior report, going back almost 20 years now, are available on the ASC website, www.asc.ca. The slide deck from today's presentation will be available on the ASC website. It should be up today, and the recorded version should be available in a couple weeks. So if you go to the website, click on that little 3 horizontal lines up at the top. I think some people call it a hamburger. It'll show the sitemap for the website, and then down in the right-hand corner of the website, you'll see a heading called News and Publications, and the reports are there under Reports, and the slide deck and recording will be available under the Presentations section. In a minute, I'm going to turn things over to Craig Burns, the manager of the Energy Group, to kick things off. But before I do, a couple final matters. First, the ASC's offices are physically located in Calgary, but the ASC's responsibilities, of course, relate to the capital market across the province. And so we'd like to acknowledge that what we call Alberta is, in fact, the traditional and ancestral territory of many peoples, presently subject to Treaty 6, 7, and 8, namely the Blackfoot Confederacy, including the Kainai, the Piikani, the Siksika, and as well the Cree, Dene, Saulteaux, Nakota Sioux, Stoney Nakoda, and the Tsuut'ina Nation, and the Métis people of Alberta. We acknowledge the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit who've lived in and cared for these lands for generations, and we are grateful for the traditional knowledge that they share and for the contributions they have made and continue to make to enhance our community. Finally, just a couple logistical points. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A function at the bottom, not the chat function. And the team has allotted time throughout the presentation to try and take questions. So hopefully we'll be able to get to them all. Second, at the end of the webinar, there will be a survey sent out. And we really do value the feedback that we receive. So we do encourage you to comment. If you have suggestions for other webinars that would be useful, please do let us know. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Craig and to Ramsey to give us the meaty details here. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Denise. Good morning, everybody. Welcome, and appreciate your attendance at this year's event. So just going to quickly here run through our agenda for today. I'm going to give a brief introduction. I always say a brief introduction, and it's a lot longer than it should be. So this year I've actually pared it back quite a bit. But I'm just going to touch on a couple of high-level things to sort of set the stage for the rest of this morning's session. We are going to go through the disclosure identified for improvement. A couple of the subjects that were actually highlighted in our report this year. We're going to talk about costs incurred in the F1. We're going to talk about independence of qualified reserves evaluators and auditors, as well as royalty interest in the F1, so the annual filings disclosure. And we're going to talk about renewable electrical generation, some hints, tips, and thoughts on how to provide that disclosure, how to improve what's currently out there. We're going to go into insights into oil and gas reserves estimates, which is exactly as it sounds. And then Ramsey is going to take over, and he's going to cover the environmental sustainability disclosure. And then at the end here, we're going to provide a section here on the Alberta capital market as it pertains to energy. We do have a question section at the end, but as Denise mentioned, we're going to attempt to do some Q&A throughout. The idea being we'll pause at the end of our section 3 after the renewable electrical generation. We'll also pause at the end of the environmental sustainability disclosure section. And then we are going to do a wrap-up Q&A. So what we'll try to do is address questions that are general and of general interest to the participants. Things that are very specific, if there's an opportunity and we think that it sort of ties in, we'll try our best to address it. If not, we'll do it at the very end, or we will follow up. So if you provide us with your contact details, and as Denise had mentioned, please submit your questions into the Q&A. The chat function has been disabled. I don't expect we're going to run the full length of 2 hours here, but we've got 2 hours because there's always a feeling that more questions, I think, would come out if you sort of allow them to. So we're going to provide lots of opportunity for some Q&A, and hopefully I'm expecting that'll take up a good amount of time here, but probably not going to run the full length. So also on the Q&A here, we're going to have Richard Bush, who is our senior energy analyst. He is going to pop on and read questions to me. In the background, we have Stacey Rollestad, who is one of our senior evaluation engineers. She's helping on the Q&A as well. So with respect to our introduction here, to start us off here, so the ASC administers Alberta's securities laws. It's entrusted to foster a fair and efficient capital market and protect investors. The ASC is a member of the Canadian Securities Administrators, or the CSA. And within the CSA, the ASC is looked to as the lead oil and gas regulator, and it increasingly to our expertise on other energy matters. Our focus is really all things energy. Anything that pertains to energy, we are trying to keep an eye on. There's much more subject matter than would actually fit on this slide here, but we've tried to highlight a few things. As you can tell, it used to be that our focus was, we said oil and gas, we meant the 51101 filers. We've been looking at beyond that for a number of years now, so the midstream pipelines and services, obviously things like helium, CCUS and sustainability matters as they pertain to the energy industry are very important to us. Renewable hydrocarbons is a big one. Liabilities. The other one here, just in the last couple of years, we've been paying attention to is the lithium from brines. So the energy group, our goal is compliant disclosure, as it is throughout corporate finance. So we conduct reviews. These reviews incorporate disclosure and also technical evaluation. So that's why we will sometimes request technical reports and sometimes geological reports and other technical reports as well. So we assess compliance with securities legislation when we do these reviews. And we develop and maintain securities legislation, maintain technical guidance, and we communicate with market participants. So with respect to the regulatory framework, that'll be important here as we move through the next section. So 51101 is our technical standard, is our regulatory standard for reporting issuers that are engaged in oil and gas activities. It addresses the general standards and specific annual requirements. The technical standard for 51101 is the COGI Handbook, the Canadian Oil and Gas Evaluation Handbook. So there are a number of forms that are required that are related to 51101 that are required for filing. The three that I'll touch on here are related to the annual filings as they're discussed in section 2.1 of the instrument 51101. And so these are required to be filed annually on CDAR Plus. And so that includes the F1, which is the statement of reserves data and other oil and gas information. So this is where you put all your estimates, your values, property descriptions, etc. There's the F2, and that's the sign off for the evaluators, so the independent qualified reserves evaluators and auditors. And signing off on that affirms the compliance with the COGI handbook. And then there's the F3, and this is the one that's the responsibility of the reporting issuers. So management and directors sign off on this and affirms the content and the filing of the F1 and the F3 and the filing of the F2. Accompanying 51101, we have the companion policy. So this includes a lot of information, background on to help you complete your filings. And this provides the views of the regulator and the CSA as it pertains to carrying out your filing. So lots of useful information in there. We've got a couple of staff notices. Key one for us today, I think we'll reference a couple of times, is 51324, which is the glossary. So lots of defined terms are in there. That accompanies the glossary that's in 51101 itself under section 1.1. And we've also got additional sources of definitions in COGI, etc. But that revised glossary is something that we recommend that you be aware of. And of course, the COGI handbook. So there's a couple of other sources of information here, just like to point out to you that are important with respect to the regulatory framework. Of course, the Securities Act. There's the Energy Matters Report, which Denise had introduced in the beginning here. It's available on our website. The Corporate Finance Disclosure Report, and there's also financial reporting bulletins published by the Office of the Chief Accountant. The Energy Matters Report, the Corporate Finance Disclosure Report, both the 2023 editions were published in December and are available on our website. So our next section here is disclosure identified for improvement. So a couple of very high-level key points here to make. So through reviews, we assess that disclosure is misleading, including by omission. We determine whether your disclosure is focusing on material information, and also whether it otherwise complies with all disclosure requirements. Those are kind of the main goals that we're looking for when we do reviews. So these reviews incorporate disclosure and certain support material, as I mentioned earlier. And the support material includes things like technical evaluations. These reviews prioritize reporting issuers for which the ASC is the principal regulator. We also assess disclosure where other jurisdictions are the prime regulator or the PR. And we proactively assist, I would say, in other jurisdictions on oil and gas matters. In fact, we're usually first to let them know of any concerns or comments that we have on their reporting issuers' disclosure. So we'll often inform them of something and have a discussion with them and ask if they would like to handle it or whether they would like our assistance. They also look to us increasingly in other energy-related matters. I would say a couple of important ones here are helium, as well as the lithium brines. That's something that we have a lot of expertise, obviously, being mostly oil field fluids or fluids related to the oil fields that we're concerned with for lithium extraction. So that is something they increasingly look to us for to help, but also on some of these other emerging energy matters. So what we're going to do today here, we're going to talk about energy-related disclosure from reporting issuers engaged in oil and gas activities, so the 51101 filers. But we're also going to talk about disclosure from reporting issuers that are involved in other energy-related matters, so not specific to oil and gas activities, although some of these companies that are engaged in oil and gas activities do get involved in these other energy matters. So just important to point that out. So our topics involve royalty interests. We're going to talk about, on the oil and gas front, I should say, we're going to talk about royalty interests, talk about cost to disclose per item 6.6 of the statement of the reserves data and other information specified in the F1, and also the independence of qualified reserves evaluators, or QREs, and qualified reserves auditors, QRAs. So with respect to royalty interests, the concern being that we have seen from time to time 51-101 annual filings that are missing royalty interests. And I think this issue, it happens a couple of times a year. We were seeing it usually less than about 5 times a year. It happens with an annual filing. It tends to arise from reporting issuers that aren't aware that royalties are caught under oil and gas activities, the definition of oil and gas activities, which is you'll find within section 1.1 of 51-101. But it does pertain to royalty interests, and we'll explain how that is the case here shortly. It goes a little bit beyond the oil and gas activities definition as well. But then there's also the situation where some of these reporting issuers think that their royalty interests aren't material. This is curious. This will happen with sometimes small companies, and all they have is a couple of royalty interests. And so they don't, for whatever reason, don't think that they need to do their include those royalty interests in their 51-101 filings, or in fact even do 51-101 filings. So we've had those situations where companies with these minor interests, they think, oh, I don't even need to do my filings because they aren't material to the company. But that's not going to be the case when it's all you have and you are engaged in oil and gas activities. That's your only business interest. And all your production comes from those royalty interests, and all your reserves are associated with those royalty interests. So this issue has mostly involved small reporting issuers. We've also seen it on the prospectus filings with respect to prospectus filings. So companies that are royalty interest companies or have a significant amount of royalty interests, and they either aren't aware that they need to incorporate royalty interests into their evaluation and ultimately into their disclosure, or it's not clear to them, and so they'll contact us and ask us questions, and usually a discussion or two explaining what we're going to explain today will help. So wanted to get this information out there, and hopefully it will clear up some of the misconceptions, or I guess lack of knowledge. So reporting issuers with royalty interests are engaged in oil and gas activities. Obviously, if those are oil and gas royalty interests. So oil and gas activities includes the acquisition of property rights or a property to explore for or remove product types. So I've got property underlined here because it is a defined term. And when you look at the defined term for property, you'll see that property specifically calls out royalty interests. So an ownership in royalty interests will automatically have you engaged in oil and gas activities. So oil and gas activities includes ownership of royalty interests. Types of royalty interests, I think probably most people are familiar with these, but gross overriding royalties, lesser royalties, net profit interests, and production payments are all generally what we look to. There can be some others, but these are the majority of what we would consider to be the types of royalty interests that we see disclosed under 51-101, or should. So section 2.1 of 51-101 addresses the annual filings. And so this is really the critical area for when we talk about royalty interests being absent from the annual filings. We'll go through some background here. So 2.1 talks about the annual filings, the requirements and the necessities for the annual filings. So section 2.1.1 requires the filing of the F1, which is the statement of the reserves data and other information. So within that, item 2.1.1 of the F1 requires specified reserves disclosure. There's an instruction there that says disclose all royalty interests in which a reporting issuer has a direct or indirect ownership, working, or royalty interest. So it specifically calls it out there. The next subject we're going to move on to here, the costs incurred. So our concern here being incorrect and absent disclosure of property acquisition costs, exploration costs, and development costs per item 6.6 of the F1. So what does this incorrect disclosure involve? Well, what we tend to notice is that there'll be disclosure within the 51-101 filings that will talk about activities that relate to acquisitions, exploration, and development. Will let us know that those things have occurred within the last year. So therefore, there'll be an expectation of costs associated with those to be disclosed in the F1. But when we look under item 6.6, we don't see those costs, or we seem to only see a portion of those costs. We also will notice wrongly determined property acquisition costs. So we'll talk about how that arises here in the coming slides. So absent disclosure involves the disclosure, as I mentioned, disclosure of activities, but no associated costs per item 6.6, or a belief that property acquisition costs exclude the value of securities used to fund an acquisition. So whether if a company raises capital, debt, equity to fund an acquisition, there are instances, and it usually happens a couple of times a year, where a company will net that off of their acquisition for whatever reason. We will also see the situation where companies will net disposition off of, if they've done a disposition, those costs, they'll net those off the acquisition costs as well. So I'll talk about here the requirements under 6.6 of the F1. So they require these costs to be disclosed. So that's the property acquisition costs, and separately for proved and unproved properties. And here it is, actually. We mentioned the deduction of property disposition costs will lead to incorrect disclosure. So we do see that. So we see where companies will net off those costs from the acquisition costs. So they'll put an artificial or a number that just doesn't add up or doesn't look appropriate under acquisition costs. We'll also see companies that either fail to provide their exploration costs or their development costs. So those are required. But there is a solution to this. If you discuss this in your financial statements and related notes, you can point to that to meet the disclosure requirements of item 6.6. Our next subject here, independence of qualified reserves evaluators and qualified reserve auditors. So the concern here being annual filing requirements that are unmet due to the filing of an F2 not executed by a QRE or QRA that's independent of the reporting issuer. I think maybe more broadly, might be appropriate to also add in here just I would say a lack of understanding with some around what the requirements of independence are, where they apply, how important they are. I would also add those in. The annual filing requirements being unmet is more of a concern, I think, based on some things that we've seen. It could happen where annual filings could occur where they're not going to be acceptable because of that lack of independence, and in some instances we've identified this potentiality. We are concerned that this is something that if people aren't aware of these requirements, that it could actually lead to annual filings that are rejected. So we're going to go through this today, and we're going to talk about the requirements and the importance of independence. So directors must ensure that the annual filing requirements per section 2.1 of 51-101 are met. So those are the requirements that we've been touching on here throughout the annual filing requirements. And also that the independence of those appointed to perform independent duties. So those are responsibilities of the directors. They've got to appoint the individuals to carry out those duties that require independence. So what is the meaning of independence? Well, or independent. And I would just bring this to everybody's attention that we do have a definition within 51-101 that for this term. I think most people probably have some idea of what independence means in various professions. There's often some sort of requirement around this or conflict of interest requirements. But I would ask you to just pay particular attention to the definition in 51-101, just to ensure that you're fully aware of what it means and how it and also how it applies. So in respect of the relationship between a reporting issuer and a person or company, independent means a relationship between the reporting issuer and that person or company in which there is no circumstance that could, in the opinion The opinion of a reasonable person aware of all relevant facts interfere with that person's or company's exercise of judgment regarding the preparation of information used by the reporting issuer. Part 3 of 51-101 addresses reporting issuer and director responsibilities. Under Section 3.2, a reporting issuer is to appoint one or more independent qualified reserves evaluators or qualified reserves auditors. And concerning the statement of the reserves data and other information specified in the F1, they are required to direct the independent qualified reserves evaluators and auditors to report to the board on the reserves data, contingent resources data, and prospective resources data that have been included in the F1. Per Section 3.4, the board of a reporting issuer must review each independent qualified reserves evaluator appointment. They also must meet with management in each independent qualified reserves evaluator and auditor before filing of the statement of the reserves data and other information. So that's the F1, and also the report prepared in accordance with the F2. And the importance of this is to determine if the independent qualified reserves evaluators or auditors can report without reservation on the reserves data, the contingent resources data, or the prospective resources data that's incorporated into the F1. Also, to review each of these and the report prepared in accordance with the F2 that's been signed by the independent qualified reserves evaluators and auditors. And then importantly, they've got to review and approve the content and filing of the statement of the reserves data and other information specified in the F1, the filing of the report prepared in accordance with the F2, but not the content of the F2, but they are responsible for the filing of that. So the content is the responsibility, the execution, I should say, of the F2 is the responsibility, obviously, of the independent qualified reserves evaluators and auditors. And then the content and filing of the report prepared in accordance with the F3. When directors approve the filing of a report prepared in accordance with the F2, they acknowledge the responsibility for the independence of the qualified reserves evaluators and qualified reserves auditors who have executed the report, and the disclosure of the reserves data and other oil and gas information. So I think this is something to really reflect on here. So the reason why I'm saying this, the F2 is executed, as I mentioned, by the independent qualified reserves evaluators and auditors, but the filing of it is a responsibility of the reporting issuer at the direction of the directors. And of course, the directors are responsible for appointing the independent qualified reserves evaluators and auditors and reviewing those appointments. So when they approve the filing of the F2, they're acknowledging the responsibility for the independence of those qualified reserves evaluators and auditors. And then they take responsibility for the reserves data and other oil and gas information. Of course, it's in the F1. And they do this ultimately through the F3, the signing, the execution, and the filing of that F3. So acceptance of these responsibilities that I've just mentioned occur with the filing of an executed report prepared in accordance with the F3. And this is something really critical. So independent qualified reserves evaluators and auditors mustn't be appointed if they're not independent. So there is a dual responsibility. I know I've just gone on and on about how it's the directors have this responsibility to ensure they appoint independent. But at the same time, there's a dual responsibility for qualified reserves evaluators and auditors to ensure that they're not appointed if they're not independent. This is very important. This is something that they need to inform if somebody moves or if there's an effort to appoint them. They need to make it clear if they are not independent or if there's any conflict of interest. And that is something that we expect will be done. And the IQREs and A's, their responsibilities are accepted when they execute the report prepared in accordance with the F2. The Kogi Handbook talks about independence. They define independent as the state of being or acting free of the influence of other parties. Independent reserves evaluators and auditors must not be influenced by any source that could prejudice their work. So there are, I think the theme of this is quite, the intent is very similar to the definition of independence that we previously reviewed per section 1.1 of 51101. But that being said, when you prepare a report that is going to be disclosed under 51101, of course, we require you to comply with 51101, and you need to meet those independence requirements. So I would look at this definition. If you're wondering, how to interpret it, I would point you to the definition of independence in 51101 to ensure that ultimately the disclosure of reporting issuers disclosure is going to be compliant. So also within the Kogi Handbook, we talk about independence. Independence is referenced in a couple of spots. But from this, what I would I guess the summation of what is in there is that qualified reserves evaluators and qualified reserves auditors, or any firm of consultants, so any of the firms that reporting issuers will go to appoint to do their reserves. So any of these firms of consultants who are shareholders, proprietors, partners, or employees should be independent from any company whose assets are evaluated. And as I mentioned, these firms include the organizations that retain people to perform QRE and QRA duties per 51101. So this is there's a couple of levels to this to consider. So the independent qualified reserves those that are appointed to perform those duties, they have a responsibility, obviously, for independence. The directors of the organizations have a responsibility to ensure that they appoint those that are independent. They also have a responsibility to ensure that if they are not independent and they are a director, that they take appropriate action to either ensure that they're not involved in processes where there is a conflict. But I think that it's fair to say that most people are aware. I'd say most people in the industry are aware of the fundamental nature of independence, and that we've got to protect the integrity of 51101 and protect the integrity of the industry, and the maintenance of independence is critical to that. If that's not upheld, I think that everybody will suffer as a result. A qualified reserves evaluator or qualified reserves auditor is considered independent if they don't have nor expect to receive any direct or indirect interest in the properties or company securities for a period of at least 6 months before, during, and after engagement. I think this is something that is often overlooked by some individuals. They're not aware of, they're maybe aware of independence more generally. They're not really aware of the specifics and how it applies in 51101 or even what the Kogi Handbook says. So the Kogi Handbook actually has this language in there about the 6 months, and I would just encourage people to ensure that they're aware of that. This can create a bit of an issue for some who from time to time may hold securities in companies that they may work with from time to time. And we also have situations where companies will, this gets into a very difficult area, probably needs its own section, but we're individuals or firms are somehow compensated in securities of the companies that they may work with. There have been those instances in the past, and I would just stress that while there are situations where that can be allowed, obviously you have to be very, very careful to understand the requirements of Kogi and understand the requirements of 51101 and ensure you adhere to them. So I think playing very close to that line is generally what gets people caught offside. So Just wanted you to be aware of that. We'll now address or attempt to address any questions that people might have. Richard hopefully is going to pop on here and tell me that somebody's submitted a question.
Okay, good morning. We have only a couple questions for that section. So either you did a fantastic job of explaining or people have nodded off. So let's hope it's the former there. So here's the first question. If a company staff member prepares reserves estimates, can those estimates be disclosed in the public domain?
So if company staff, okay, so assuming that they're qualified reserves evaluators, or do we know? We don't really know at this point, I guess.
Yeah, it's not specified, but I would assume they would be QREs, just not independent.
So certainly if they disclose anything that's required under 51-101 to be prepared by a qualified reserves evaluator or auditor, they would need to adhere to those. So, estimates of volumes and values of resources in particular would be what would require a qualified reserves evaluator. Also has to be prepared in accordance with the COGI handbook. So that would apply to all oil and gas technical disclosure. Sorry, was there an independence question on that, Richard? Or was just more generally whether they can?
Yeah, just more general.
Yeah, so they can. It's one of the things I would stress is that what we have found is often individuals that do prepare reserves for firms that they work for are less knowledgeable on the requirements than, say, as you would expect from some of the evaluation firms around town. And that's one of the reasons why we, I would say we pay more attention to companies that disclose internally prepared estimates because they tend to be less familiar. And when you ask them questions around their qualifications, they will let you know that they are a member of a PEGA. So they're of the view that, okay, well, I meet that requirement. I'm a member of a professional organization. Being a member of a professional organization is a requirement, but a PEGA does not have anything to do with reserves experience or requirements around the preparation. So just put that, just let people know that, the professional requirement is one thing, but also the experience in reserves. And so a lot of people will feel that, I've done reserves from time to time over my career, therefore I'm qualified to prepare estimates, and would point out that unless you've been doing reserves regularly, and that's really the primary work that you do in that organization, it's very unlikely that you're going to meet the requirements for experience. So hopefully that bit of background helps.
Good, thanks. So the next one, the ASC sent us a letter regarding the disclosure of gross production estimates. Can you clarify what is expected when disclosing production?
Okay, so when disclosing production, there's a couple of points to keep in mind here. So obviously we've in the past we've talked about product types, so you're going to want to use the appropriate product types. So we define product types under section 1.1 of 51-101. So you're going to want to have those in those appropriate product types. They're also going to have to be at the first point of sale. So those production volumes are going to be at the first point of sale. And when you provide, so maybe just back up here, just make sure that they are what you're actually selling. So if you're disclosing natural gas and natural gas liquids, ensure that you actually are selling natural gas and natural gas liquids. Otherwise, you're selling natural gas with the liquids entrained, and you're getting the value for that. So just be very, very careful that it's at the first point of sale, the product types. And with respect to gross and net, this is something that does come up every couple of years. It'll come up that companies will for whatever reason want to talk about what is more, I think, more generally considered lease or gross lease numbers. So they'll put out saying that they've drilled a well and it's producing at a certain number, but it's not their working interest number. and you have to explain to them the definitions of gross and net. That is with respect to royalties under 51-101. It's not with respect to working interest. It's expected that your gross and net will always be working interest. And so we'll have from time to time companies that will put out numbers that don't match the numbers they'll ultimately put in, say, their MD&As or in their annual filings for their sales. And you've got to be extremely careful if you don't properly disclose your production, because this will get shareholders probably writing letters and will get us confused and having to open reviews and take a look and try to understand what is being done.
Okay, perfect. We've got a few more coming in here, so that's good. Sorry.
Okay.
If a staff member gets option proceeds or RSU within 6 months, does that cause them to no longer be considered an independent QRE or QRA?
Okay, so this would be independent. Sorry, did you say independent? To be an
if a staff member gets option proceeds,
yeah. Okay,
or RSU.
No, that wouldn't. I was thinking more. Yeah, so obviously somebody who's internal to an organization, if their compensation is, I mean, the area you've got to be concerned about is if you are being compensated specifically for attaining or reaching certain, or guarantees around reserves and things like this. This would be where you would run offside. But in general, your compensation, if you're working for the organization, isn't something that we would, there's no requirement for you to be independent if you're doing work internally, unless you've applied for exemptive relief, which is not something that is common. For the annual filings, it's more of a historic thing that we've seen. So for a reporting issuer if a qualified reserves evaluator doesn't have a requirement to be independent, the whole issue of their options and performance units and that wouldn't come into play.
Okay. If a reporting issuer has received approval for a change of business from oil and gas activities to another unrelated industry and has only minor properties remaining with associated ARO, are they still required to file? It says an NI 51-101, but I'm assuming the forms, the 51-101 forms, I'm assuming is what is meant there.
Okay, so they're involved in another business. Are they also involved? Do they see themselves involved in oil and gas activities, or is the only thing they have is just these liabilities?
Yeah, that's my understanding. So maybe exiting out and hold on to a few associated liabilities for the time being.
Yeah, so I would think that if a company has already moved on to a different industry and they've, certainly, I'm not sure if in this particular case, whether they would have filed an F5, which is required within 10 business days of them determining that they are not engaged in oil and gas activities. So as long as they do that, I would not consider some abandonment liabilities to automatically, catch them. I mean that they're caught under 51-101. That's sort of my first impression here.
Okay. Does the F1, F2, and F3 need to be reported as separate documents on CDAR Plus, or is it fine if the F1, F2, and F3 statements are within the annual information form?
Yeah, so either of those options is appropriate. You can either do them separate or you can do them within the AIF. Just point you to the F5 to let people know where they are if you haven't filed them separately, if you've actually filed them within the AIF, just to provide that F4 so people know where to look. But one place or the other, not in both, please. We would just ask.
Okay, and the last one here. How can a staff member ever be considered independent?
A staff member. No more information?
That's all we got.
Boy. Okay. Hopefully we can get some more information. Maybe that individual would like to follow up with us with some more. I'll do my best to answer. But there would, as I had mentioned here moments ago, there would not be, since there's a requirement to appoint an independent qualified reserves evaluator or auditor for a company's completion of its annual filing requirements, they wouldn't be looking internally to for that individual, so they would be going external. So staff member that works for a reporting issuer, the independence is not something that we would be looking to verify. I mean, I think if somebody actually said that they were independent, that would be a different story. So if somebody working for a reporting issuer claimed they were independent and they prepared some estimates, we would, even if they weren't required to be independent, but they said they were, we would try to understand what they were talking about and understand whether they understood the requirements and whether maybe something has gone wrong here, where maybe they've done something that maybe they shouldn't have. But I would see, since there's no requirement for it, I don't think that in general this should be an issue. But I think we've seen once or twice where somebody has mentioned that something was done independently and it was done internally, and I think that those were just mistakes, is my recollection, but could very easily be wrong.
Okay, sorry, one more came in here. So is independence of a QREA only required for the annual filings, or is it required for press release disclosure?
So it's required for the annual filings, but also keep in mind wherever the annual filing requirements are pulled in. So, for instance, with respect to prospectus filings, where it calls on, directs you to complete your annual filings. So that is still related to annual filings, but I would just say that there is no requirement for independence on things like news releases. It's not uncommon for companies to consult with their independent qualified reserves evaluators when they do prepare disclosure, to ensure that they're disclosing the estimates and providing the proper descriptions, etc. Certainly for smaller companies that maybe need a little bit of extra help, they'll often go in that direction. But there is no requirement to have independence for any of your disclosure outside of the annual filings.
Okay, and that takes care of the questions for this section.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we'll move on to our next section. So we are going to talk about other energy-related disclosure. So non-51-101 disclosure. This disclosure has been increasing in recent years, and we've talked about it in the last few reports. So we've talked about some of the subject matter started in 2021, but in 2022, in our Energy Matters report, we talked about helium, renewable hydrocarbons, and geothermal, and how you would disclose these. 2021 report, we talked about helium, hydrogen, lithium from oil field brines, and carbon capture, utilization, and storage. I would advise you, though, to go to the 2022 report for any information with respect to helium. Our thoughts evolved, and we provided a lot more information in the 2022 report versus the 2021 report. So with respect to the 2023 report, we chose for our subject here renewable electricity generation via wind, solar, hydro, and biomass. That was our focus. So we're going to address disclosure expectations for these, along with their facilities, their infrastructure, and their technologies. It's really important to think of these as a bundle. And before we get into this, I think it's maybe important to also mention that what we're going to talk about, if this wasn't really specific to electrical generation, you could basically put in any subject here. You could say, geothermal. You could say, even oil and gas. To be honest with you, most of what we talk about are going to be some of the basic bits of information that we are looking to see in disclosure, and we would hope that you would consider providing to ensure that your disclosure is done appropriately. So just keep that in mind, that if you have some other subject matter that maybe we haven't talked about in the last couple of years, and with respect to other energy matters, you could really use this as a template for that. So next slide, please. So the rationale for talking about this particular subject is the growing interest. We also see variability in disclosure quality. So I think with oil and gas or issuers that report under 51101, most people are familiar with how that disclosure is done and the level of detail. We tend to not see that level of detail with respect to some of these other energy matters. And when you're used to seeing that information and not seeing it in a different area, it kind of brings to light, I guess, the quality of 51101 disclosure and the quality of the regulatory framework we have around it. And what we're trying to do is encourage people that are disclosing outside of 51101 that they think about some of the things that people may want to see, or there may be a requirement from them to see. We think a lot of this information is, in fact, material. So generally, smaller reporting issuers, our hope is that they'll focus on more informative disclosure. Individual projects are probably more material for them as opposed to some of the bigger issuers. If a large company, a midstream company, initiates a project, say a solar project, it's probably not going to be material for them, and so less information is probably appropriate. But for smaller companies, if they're talking about doing something like a biomass plant or some sort of a electrical generation facility, and it's much different for them, the materiality, obviously. And there's a lot of information that we would hope that they would provide. And so far, we've seen some good disclosure, but we've seen a lot of companies that I think maybe aren't sure what they should provide. So, but determining what specifically to disclose can be difficult. So that might speak to why disclosure varies. So 51101 addresses principles and requirements for disclosure of oil and gas activities, but other energy-related topics, they don't have a technical instrument, and we're not there with the I think the critical mass to need one. So we're hoping to sort of fill the gap here with some information here today. Some key points for this disclosure that or the information we're going to provide here. I think we want reporting issuers and their professional service providers to think about the general principles relating to balanced, complete, and accurate disclosure, focused primarily on materiality. We assume prominently featured disclosure is material. Forward-looking information should have a reasonable basis. Want them to disclose material risks and assumptions, and define and explain technical terminology. So we'll get right into it here. So the project details to consider disclosing include, and this is on a project basis. So the location of that project we think is fundamental. So country, province, territory, state, those sorts of things. Sometimes we don't see that. Sometimes we'll see a basin or some general locale. You know that they're operating in South America, but you have no idea whereabouts. The size of that project, so the nameplate or this installed capacity. If there's existing projects, if this is an existing project, actually the output. So maybe perhaps a little bit of history on what its output has been, the number of facilities, and the arrays, etc. If we're talking about things like solar farms. So just letting us know the size of the project is very important. Whether it's standalone or whether it's part of a larger project. So some of these projects can be integrated with, in fact, we see that in oil and gas where companies will have some facility that's associated with their oil and gas project, and it's not a project that's caught under 51101. In those instances, there is the option for them to include some of that disclosure under 51101 if it relates. From an overall standpoint to help people understand the project, but with for projects that are not related to oil and gas, if it's standalone or associated with a larger project, please just make that clear. So the economic interest, this is critical. So the net, the gross, and the interest type, and I guess if it's, since we're outside of 51101, really what you mean by those terms, net and gross, because as we've seen, that can mean different things to different people. Also the type of interest you have, whether it's a working interest, whether it's royalty or some other type of interest, is extremely important. Also whether you operate or whether it's non-operating interest. So the economics and capital, there's a number of things here. So the economic status, we want to know whether this project, if it's a proposed project, whether it's economic, sub-economic. We want to know the project value or economic impact, certainly if it's been determined. So if there is a project value or economic impact that has been determined, so the basis for the valuation would be critical, the methodology used, the input data, so including things like the cost, the fiscal criteria, burdens, incentives, grants, things like that. We would want to see all the input data and value determination sources. So whether that's internal, whether you've got it from a report that's been prepared for you, whether you've got it from some other source, please provide that information. Also the effective date of all this work. We'd like to see the undiscounted development cost, also with, should say, like the data associated with that determination, and the sources of capital for this project. The status, the timeline, and the approvals. So the project status, so whether this is, under development, whether this is something that's going to be developed over a long period of time and you haven't actually initiated development at all, you're just in the scoping stage, what have you. General timeline, including the timing for the final investment decision, commissioning of the project, when you expect it to be fully operational, producing at its capacity or at its nameplate, and the status of internal and external approval. So this is something that most of the stuff you would probably recognize from requirements under 51101 and the COGI handbook guidance. We talk about the importance of these approvals, and this is much more important than it's ever been. So not just regulator approvals, but also internal, whether the company is determined to, or has decided to move ahead with the project, or whether it is just the initial stages of determining the feasibility, etc. Putting that information in the disclosure is extremely important. Also, the market access, whether that has been secured, including the infrastructure that's necessary for that. If it's not secured, when and how it will be achieved. The technology, the specific technology to be used. This is an area that's been challenging for when we've noticed companies that have put out information on a facility they're going to build, what have you, a wind farm. Maybe not a wind farm. Let's say maybe something that's they're gonna biomass. We'll go back to biomass on this one. And there's a specific technology they're going to use, but they're going to do enhancements to that technology. They're going to be changing things, putting that in the disclosure, how that technology will be applied, whether that technology has been used before, and what the results were, whether it's experimental, or whether this is something that's commercially being used today. Very important to know. And that really speaks to the risks and uncertainties, because that not only includes things like technology and market access, but really what the risks and uncertainties are around the entire project. But the specific ones that that are relevant to that project is what we really want to see. So not all, like, we recognize that people are going to put the boilerplate in, but we also want to see specifically what are the risks and uncertainties with getting this project off the ground, getting it operating, etc. We want to see those in the disclosure. So we'll see if we have any questions here. Richard, if we got any?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, we have two that have come in so far. If a company has helium and natural gas, how would they disclose the helium volumes in their annual filings if it isn't a product type?
All right. This one's an easy one. I can point you to the 2022 Energy Matters report. We've gone into great detail there on how to do that. And would take me probably 15 minutes to go through it here. But I'd be very happy if you want to follow up. I can walk you through the information in that report. I can get you a copy of it. It's on our website. But maybe I'll avoid going into detail on that right now, because that would really take a big chunk of time here.
Okay, one more so far. How would a company disclose lithium from oil field brines?
Yeah, so that's a 43101 matter, and I don't pretend to be an expert in 43101, but lithium brines would be disclosed under that. Now there is, we have been helping with the BCSC primarily helps us with the mining files, but we've been helping them because of the relationship between lithium and these oil field brines, and so there is that reservoir component. And so, our expectation is we will run into some of these situations where we're going to have companies that are processing reservoir fluids. They're also producing hydrocarbons, so there'll be a 51101 filer, and maybe we'll have disclosure to do under 43101. So some of these things could get complicated. Our hope is that people will check with us if they have any questions on this. But by and large, I think there's a dividing line between the two. 43101 will catch the lithium, and 51101 will catch the oil and gas activities. But there's probably going to be a need to cross-reference at some point here some of these projects in disclosure to make it clear to investors what's going on and the nature of the relationships between the oil and gas activities and the lithium and vice versa.
Okay, looks like that's everything related to this section, so I think we can move on.
Thank you, Richard. So we are going to talk about insights into oil and gas reserves estimates, and then I get a break after this. What I'll do with this here is just talk a little bit about the sort of the rationale for including this section here. So this is new for us, and the information here is actually drawn primarily from our Energy Matters report, and we've included information on reconciliations for many years. But it's new for us to kind of go into some detail here, maybe dive in and really tear this stuff apart and talk about it in our Energy Matters session or in our previous oil and gas sessions that we used to do. So the reason we wanted to do this was because as we've been collecting this data, now we've got 10 years of data, so we've seen a couple of business cycles, and we've noticed a few trends, some things that concern us, but also some interesting things that are just maybe perhaps just nice to mention. And so as we get started here, we have seen this issue of increasingly negative technical revisions over the last 10 years, but primarily in the last 5 years. And it's got to the point now in the last couple of years that it's actually getting increasingly rare to see positive technical revisions. And that shouldn't be the case. It shouldn't be the case, obviously, with proved technical revisions. With proved reconciliations, we shouldn't see them. It should be very, very rare. And 2P, they really should balance out, where we should see over time, positive and negative revisions balancing each other out. What we've done with this analysis here is we've taken all of our reporting issuers engaged in oil and gas activities, we've ranked them by production, and we've grouped them into these groups: seniors, intermediates, and juniors. So the juniors are the ones that produce up to 10,000 BOEs per day. The seniors are those that produce over 100,000, and the intermediates are everybody in between. And so what we do is we group them all together, and we look at as a group because we've noticed some real trends within those groups. So we thought at least it seems feasible to do this exercise to see what the performance is like on that group basis. So we've seen this increase in negative technical revisions. As I said, in 2021 here, 2022, or as we've gotten further down here, we've really seen positive technical revisions have essentially disappeared on a group level. We'll go to the next slide here, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this. So as I said, these technical revisions really should balance out over time, and they haven't been. So just increasingly negative and rarity of positive technical revisions. So the trend is concerning. If you look at these scatter plots, if we look at 2016, and we'll see as a lot more green dots than red dots. And so in that particular year in 2016, it looked okay. It looked like we had a lot of positive technical revisions, not as many negative. We got to 2019, and we picked these years just because we thought these years were good snapshots of this trend. But in between these years, these trends are very consistent. So in 2019, it looked like we saw more of a balance between the positive technical revisions and the negative. There were more negative, but it's more balanced. And then when we got into 2022, and as I mentioned earlier, 2021 as well looks very similar to this. We have very few positive technical revisions and a large number of negative. Now these scatter plots are actually created with each company being a dot. And so all of the companies are included on here, all the intermediates, seniors, juniors, and there's no differentiation by company size. And as long as they have a reconciliation, they are included in this. And so when you group them all up, we showed that there were no positive technical revisions for 21 and 22. When we dive in on the individual company basis here, we see that this trend is actually real. It's not just on the group basis, but on the individual basis. So we can go in and we can look at these individual companies, and some of these companies we'll see that have a history of negative technical revisions, which indicates to us that reserves have been not been booked, or potentially have not been booked appropriately over a period of time, because this really is a trailing indicator of something that's happened in the past, these negative technical revisions. So we are keeping an eye on this, and we're going to be doing a lot more work on this, including hopefully including more of this in our next, or this year's, I guess, 2024 report. So we've done some other work with respect to reserves. We've got an awful lot of data, and we have been using that data to try to understand trends amongst groups of issuers, amongst individual issuers. And we thought that these might sort of give a little bit of perspective on kind of how companies are booking reserves depending on their size. So when you look at this, the one thing you'll notice is that we do see increasing PDP reserves over time. We'll see that if you look from 2018 to 2022, in each of these cases, we see this trend towards increasing PDP reserves. Looks like we're seeing maybe a decrease in approved undeveloped reserves as well. The PDNP was interesting. You'll see obviously increasing PDP reserves between the seniors and the juniors. We've looked into this to try to understand what this is. With respect to the intermediates, it tends to be one or two companies every year that will have a large amount of PDNP reserves, and those will subsequently disappear, and then another company or two will have those. For the juniors, it seems to be a lot of companies have a small amount, and then there's a lot of companies that don't have any, is what we've noticed. The next couple of charts here are just more information. If you're interested maybe in seeing where your company's particular reserves allocations fall, these charts may be of some help. I think over time we're going to start showing these yearly. So you'll start to see how things look from year to year. We can do comparisons. So 1 year snapshot doesn't tell us a whole lot. But we'll endeavor to include more information in the future. So you'll see here, most of the companies kind of cluster in the middle here, but probably close to 60% of them fall between having 20% and 50% of their reserves being ratio of PDP to 2P reserves being PDP reserves. So about 50%, maybe 60%. And this one here is percentage of gross approved undeveloped reserves to 2P reserves. This one you've got much more broader, I think, allocation. You'll see that we still do have a little bit of a cluster here. Maybe about half of those issuers fall somewhere in between, probably 30 and 70%. And then, of course, we have a couple of outliers. It's not unusual to have these outliers. Companies that have a couple of locations, small companies, a couple of locations, maybe not much else, will skew this. And then we've also got obviously a couple of companies maybe have an awful lot of undeveloped reserves and are just in the process of converting those to PDP reserves, and so you end up with both ends of the spectrum here. And this is an interesting one. We've noticed that we have seen, as we've lost, and we'll talk about this more in the last section on capital markets, we've seen as we have lost reporting issuers, we have actually had individual companies overall have got more reserves, and it's almost a wash. So as we've lost those issuers, those reserves have been mostly transferred to other existing reporting issuers, and that's sort of supported by this plot here. So from 2018 until 2022, we've had about a 17% increase in the gross 2P reserves for Alberta reporting issuers engaged in oil and gas activities. I will just point out here, if you're looking at the scale, you are going to wonder what the heck was going on with this scale when we made it. It is done incorrectly. I apologize for that. And what this goes from on the bottom on the x-axis, it actually goes from 520 million to 700 million. So you'll see that the average company right now, if we take all the oil and gas reporting issuers, we're, I don't know, 675 million barrels, the average allocation of reserves, and that's up from about 570 just in 2018. Next, we'll take any questions anybody might have.
Okay, kind of just a general question. Are these slides going to be made available?
Yes. So these slides will be on our website later today. So the slide deck, as you see it, will be on there. And we will follow that with the slide deck with a voiceover that will be within a week or two. Is our expectation, maybe sooner.
Okay, and last one. Is it surprising or concerning that reserves continued an increasing trend from 2019 to 2022, despite all the uncertainty and turmoil throughout those years as we dealt with COVID-19?
I think, I don't think so. And I think one of the reasons for that is that, we've had this consolidation. So we've had companies taking over other companies, and so those reserves have predominantly been recognized previously. It's not companies that are envisioning or coming up with brand new projects entering new jurisdictions. We're not really seeing that. We're not seeing companies that are coming up with huge new expansions, say oil sands projects like we would have seen in the past. I think that it's just more of that consolidation of the existing reserves, and companies then determining, I guess there's a determination needs to be made as to whether they're going to carry on with that, with some of those plans. And that may account for some of these reserve revisions that we've seen. But I think overall it's not concerning because, we haven't, besides the negative technical revisions, which is something that I think is going to have to play out. And we hope that companies will, ensure that the reserves are booked appropriately. Beyond that, I don't think that I've had any concerns around companies booking with, the heightened awareness, I guess, around sustainability issues and that, I think as we've all seen, there's still a tremendous need for these hydrocarbons, and that demand isn't going away. And our issuers are seem to be committed to continuing to produce them. And we've got things coming around in terms of disclosure around emissions and things like this that I think from time to time people have been afraid was maybe going to result in their businesses being maybe more constrained and make it more difficult for them to exist. As it stands now, I don't have any concerns. I think that we don't know what could happen with new regulations and requirements, but as it stands, I think things are okay with us seeing those. I would be okay with reserves that are increasing as long as we continue to see companies, moving through the drilling inventories. That's a very important thing, and that is something that we keep in mind. We keep monitoring. Companies that have booked up lots of reserves, we want to see them working through that and not maintaining inventories that they don't have the intention of pursuing.
Okay. Have you included percent liquid splits in your stats regarding PDP to total proof plus probable or PUD to total proof plus probable? as well as negative revision trends?
We have this stuff by product type. So we've got the reserves, we've got all that by product type. So we haven't included any of that, and we haven't done that work yet. But that's something that we would consider doing. We're trying to think of some ways to maybe continue to bring new information, forward from our data set. That's certainly something that we could consider doing. Richard, I believe we do have that.
Yeah, we do have that. We have all the negative revision volumes take place. Basically, all that info is taken from the annual filing documents. So yeah, we have it all. And like you said, we're just trying to figure out at this point how the best way to display it and without overwhelming everyone with a ton of charts too, right? So yeah, we do have it, and we can provide that info.
And also, when we talk about the percentages though of reserves allocation, percentage by product type is something we'll have to look in to see how much depth we could actually go into with if we were looking to do sort of a liquid split. But I believe we have some of that information.
And that is it for this section.
Okay. So for real, we're going to turn this over to Ramsey. Ramsey Ewan, he is one of our senior evaluation engineers, and he is the individual responsible for tracking the environmental sustainability disclosure for all of our energy issuers, as well as our 43101 filers in Alberta. He's expanded into that. So he's going to take you through his data set and some findings. Take it away, Ramsey.
Thanks, Craig. Yeah, happy to be here to share some of the things we've seen in terms of sustainability and environmental disclosures from our energy issuers, and also some of the general trends we've been seeing in the last few years. So yeah, I hope you all find this informative and interesting. So in recent years, there's been growing interest for disclosure of greenhouse gas emissions, climate risks, and other sustainability factors. And in the past few years, stakeholders have been showing their interest towards these types of disclosures, and reporting issuers appear to be responding. Current Canadian securities legislation doesn't mandate GHG emissions disclosure. However, we have seen voluntary environmental and other sustainability data disclosures from reporting issuers as a response to the overall interest in this area. We've been monitoring these disclosures in the energy group since 2021. And what we've called these types of reviews have changed over the years, but we've referred to them most recently as environmental sustainability monitoring reviews. So a little bit more about these environmental sustainability monitoring reviews. In anticipation of more prevalent environmental disclosures, we've conducted these reviews for energy-related Alberta reporting issuers. And the data collected through these reviews, they're ongoing, and we do plan to continue to collect information on these types of disclosures. These reviews, they assess basic information such as whether or not the sustainability disclosure has occurred, the timing and frequency of disclosure, how the disclosure has been prepared, the method of disclosure, and whether or not specific environmental information, such as GHG emissions, has been disclosed. However, these reviews didn't assess the quality of the disclosure, nor whether specific social or governance type information has been disclosed. And over the next several slides, I'll be highlighting some of our findings. GHG emissions disclosure is currently being done by reporting issuers through voluntary disclosure, such as through sustainability reports or disclosures made on company websites. And of the reporting issuers engaged in oil and gas activities, we see there are 73 issuers, or 62%, have had recent sustainability disclosures. I'll just direct your attention to the dark slice of the circle chart. And 44 issuers, or 38%, have had no recent sustainability disclosure. And that's shown in the green slice. 52% of issuers have provided this information in a standalone sustainability report, and 10% of oil and gas issuers have only this information on their website. But it's important to note here that the information disclosed on websites we usually found to be less informative than those disclosed in standalone reports. And rarely do these website disclosures have any quantified metrics, such as GHG emissions disclosure. In comparison to previous years, I'll just direct your attention to the graph on the right-hand side. So there were 48 oil and gas issuers who published a sustainability report last year, and 40 issuers in the year prior. So it has been an upward trend since we started our monitoring reviews. New to this year's edition of the Energy Matters report, I think Craig mentioned this, we've extended the monitoring reviews to include the disclosure from utilities and NI 43-101 issuers, for which the ASC is the principal regulator. So oil and gas midstream, pipelines, and oil and gas services reporting issuers, they were added to the reviews in the previous year, and we've continued to collect data for those sub-industries as well. I should mention now that our sample size for this figure is 117 oil and gas issuers, 8 midstream, 32 oil and gas services, 13 utilities, and 55 NI 43-101 issuers. All of the oil and gas, midstream, and pipeline reporting issuers have had a recent sustainability report published. And 47% of the oil and gas issuers or oil and gas services reporting issuers have had a sustainability report published in the recent years. And 77% of utilities issuers have published a standalone sustainability report. And only one NI 43-101 issuer was identified to have a standalone sustainability report. Again, these stats are for the Alberta principally regulated reporting issuers. In future years, we will continue to monitor these sub-industries for general trends. So Craig has mentioned this early in the webinar as well. The oil and gas reporting issuers, they were split and grouped by annual production, with senior reporting issuers being those with greater than 100,000 BOE per day of production, intermediates being between 10,000 and 100,000 BOE per day, and juniors being those with under 10,000 BOE per day of production. They were then ranked by highest production and then selected from each of the group. Ultimately, we sampled 10 senior, 20 intermediate, and 46 junior reporting issuers. So for these next figures, we're looking at a sample size of 76 total oil and gas issuers. So as shown in the figure, all of the representative senior issuers have published a standalone report containing sustainability information. And all 20 of the intermediate issuers have also published a standalone sustainability report. And of the junior oil and gas issuers, 9 reporting issuers have a standalone sustainability report. 9 have sustainability information on their website. And 28 junior oil and gas issuers currently have no substantial sustainability disclosure. So compared to last year, there were no major changes in terms of the senior and intermediate oil and gas issuers. However, there was a small increase in the number of junior oil and gas issuers with a sustainability report published. So it is on an upward trend. So these next 2 slides, I'll show you the sustainability reporting frameworks and standards being used by the issuers to prepare their sustainability reports. Important to note here that these figures relate only to those that have a published sustainability report. And also, these figures represent the number of reporting issuers that have mentioned or referenced the framework or standard, and we did not assess the quality or whether or not they'd be in full compliance of the framework or standard. So as a quick summary, the frameworks and standards we focused on in our monitoring reviews are the TCFD and their recommendations, the Global Reporting Initiative or GRI standards, and the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board or SASB standards. And we've chosen to focus on these three because they're currently the most common frameworks and standards we found being disclosed or being used to prepare the disclosure. And combined with our previous year's reviews, it does provide a continuity of year-over-year comparison. So I'd like to draw your attention to the red bars here, which shows the number of issuers incorporating all three, GRI, SASB, and TCFD in preparing their sustainability reports. So from the numbers shown on the figure, it's clear that many of the reporting issuers are actually using more than one framework to prepare their disclosure. So 7 senior reporting issuers and 11 intermediate reporting issuers are incorporating all three frameworks in their sustainability disclosures. So compared to last year, there's little change in the overall trend or big picture of how these frameworks and standards are being used by the oil and gas issuers. And in this figure, we'll see the frameworks and standards being used by each of the other energy sub-industries. So again, new for this year is the addition of the utilities reporting issuers. And the red bar here is something, again, I'd like to highlight. It shows many issuers are using all three frameworks. So the main takeaway here is that many are incorporating various frameworks and standards while preparing their sustainability reports. And these reporting schemes, frameworks, standards, they are each unique, but they do also appear to be complementary to each other. So this next figure shows the GHG emissions disclosure among oil and gas reporting issuers split by production grouping size. Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3 GHG emissions have been disclosed in terms of CO2 equivalents, which includes emissions of carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide. So these scopes are defined, and I'm sure there's some degree of familiarity with these definitions among the audience, but I'll just go over these real quickly. Scope 1 being all direct emissions owned or controlled by the reporting issuer. Scope 2 referring to indirect emissions attributed to energy acquired by the reporting issuer. So generally this means purchased electricity, heat, or steam. And Scope 3 being all other indirect emissions attributed to up and down the value chain of the reporting issuer. And other air emissions here in our figure, that refers to disclosure about emissions such as nitrogen oxides, sulfur dioxide, volatile organic compounds, and particulate matter emissions. So these are generally disclosed separately by the issuer, but they've been grouped in our reviews. So as shown, all of the senior issuers, all of the intermediates, and 8 juniors, or 17% of the juniors, disclose Scope 1 emissions. And that's similar when we look at Scope 2 emissions disclosures. Scope 3 emissions are less widely disclosed, however, and when they are disclosed, there are differences we found among disclosure in terms of what the Scope 3 number actually includes. For example, if it includes emissions associated with the end use of products, or whether only Scope 3 emissions from a certain category is counted. There's been generally little year-over-year changes in this figure, with the exception of 1 or 2 issuers adding or removing Scope 3 emissions disclosure to their sustainability reports. So as I've alluded to in previous slides, I'm just going to walk you through some of the trends over time. We've been tracking the GHG emissions disclosure for the oil and gas issuers since 2021. So this graph shows the percentage of seniors, intermediates, and junior oil and gas issuers that disclose Scope 1 GHG emissions. And you can see here that the trend has been increasing. And for Scope 2 GHG emissions disclosure, we do see a very similar story, and it's not surprising since many reporting issuers who do report Scope 1, they also report Scope 2 GHG emissions. And it's interesting to see here in these graphs the uptake in the junior issuers that are disclosing GHG emissions. And finally, I'll move on to Scope 3. For Scope 3 GHG disclosure, we do see that it has been less widely disclosed compared to Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. And there's not much of a strong trend at this point that I can see. I think this may speak to the challenges and uncertainties that may come from preparing estimates of Scope 3 GHG emissions. So this figure shows the emissions disclosure of oil and gas compared to the other sub-industries. So the oil and gas services, midstream, and utilities issuers. So these are for only the ones that have published a standalone sustainability report. So the sample size for these figures are 39 oil and gas issuers, 15 oil and gas services issuers, 8 midstream, and 10 utilities issuers. So all oil and gas midstream issuers have disclosed Scope 1 emissions and to a lesser extent, some Scope 3 emissions. And 70% of utilities issuers have disclosed Scope 1 and 2 emissions, and 40% have Scope 3 emissions. And proportionally, there are fewer oil and gas services companies that do have emissions disclosure. So this final figure shows a few of the other key environmental disclosures for production grouping. Energy usage, water usage, and abandonment and reclamation activities. These are commonly seen in these sustainability reports. Of these, I may direct your attention to the abandonment and reclamation activities, which may be of particular interest due to its related disclosure requirements in NI 51-101. So the majority of senior and intermediate oil and gas issuers have provided this information in their sustainability reports. Lastly, I do want to mention that there is additional information on our sustainability disclosure monitoring reviews in the Energy Matters report. And that concludes the sustainability disclosure review portion of this section. Happy to take any questions if anyone has any at this time.
Okay, thanks, Ramsey. We do have a couple questions. First, is there anywhere where it discloses who the senior, intermediate, and junior issuers are that were sampled? It could be a good use as a reference for juniors who have not made disclosure.
I don't think we disclosed the specific issuers that are sorted into these buckets, but our methodology has been the most recent reported year annual BOE production, sorted from largest to smallest. And the breakdown is greater than 100,000 is senior, between 10 and 100 is the intermediates, and under 10 being the juniors. And we took the largest of the cohort for our sample sizes.
Okay, next, do we know when will GHG emissions disclosures be required?
Yeah, I can do my best to answer this one with what are staff's views on GHG emissions disclosure requirements. So for those not aware, the CSA previously published a proposed climate-related disclosure instrument, 51-107, in 2021. So 51-107 would have included, among other things, some GHG emissions disclosure requirements. We've received comment letters since it has gone out for public comment. Since then, however, there have been significant developments internationally, namely the publication of the ISSB standards last year, IFRS S1 and S2. So the Canadian Sustainability Standards Board, the CSSB, they'll be in the consultation process based on the ISSB standards that were recently published. And I do believe that they've stated that the consultation process will begin in March. And we'll be closely monitoring the developments and comment letters that arise from that process. And following that, we do anticipate that the CSSB will publish their standards. And then, and these are staff's views, but subject to all necessary approvals and processes, we do anticipate that the CSA would publish a new proposed climate-related instrument for comment. Typically, this would be a 90-day comment period. So we do encourage that reporting issuers and other capital market participants provide their feedback and comment letters when they are able to do so.
Okay, great. We do have some questions coming in, but we have to be cognizant of time here. So we're going to have to push those to the end. And like we've said earlier, we'll try to get back to everyone as best we can.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think we'll have to kind of move on to the final segment. So we leave some time for Craig and maybe some questions at the end of the presentation.
Sure.
Thanks, Ramsey. So our next section, the last section, is energy and the Alberta capital market. We'll get through this here in just probably less than 10 minutes, and then we'll move on to the final Q&A, wrap-up Q&A. So as Denise actually mentioned in her intro, data informs our decisions. It's something it's critical to our understanding of the capital market and understanding of regulation. It helps us make decisions. Our data is mostly sourced from regulatory filings, so we collect that data ourselves. We don't rely on anybody else. It's us, and we scrutinize the data to ensure that it's not put in the wrong spot, etc. We take that information after it's been scrutinized, and we store it, and we do analysis on it. The only data we actually go outside for is some of the trading data. So all the information that you see is actually collected by us manually, entering it and scrutinizing and entering it. We are going to talk about some of our capital markets data here today, and just will remind you that if you'd like to see more of the types of information we're going to show in the section, to go to our Energy Matters report on our website, because that will contain probably 3 or 4 times as many charts that we're going to actually show here today. As we get into this, I'll just point out that every single one of the charts that you see in this section and throughout the presentation, with the exception, I think, 2 or 3 that are not in the report. They're all actually in the report except for those 3. And you'll see a reference on the bottom, and the footnote tells you the page. So our hope is that you go there and you read up on methodology and to get additional information to help you understand things, because we're going to go through at a fairly high level here. So with respect to reporting issuers, we're going to talk about the numbers of reporting issuers in each energy-related sub-industry. And so over the years here, we've increased, moving beyond just the oil and gas activities into the oil and gas services, midstream utilities. And this year we added lithium, and a couple of years ago we added helium and others. So we have all these sub-industries. We track all the companies. We track disclosure to see who is new in those different groupings and who is no longer around. What we've seen here just in the last couple of years, and you'll see 3 years of data on this chart here, we've seen relative stability in the 51101 filers for the last 3 years. In fact, that number, I'll mention to you here, we have 120 here for year-end, year-to-date 2023. That actual number at year-end was actually 117. But 117, we're still a little bit up over last year. It's the first time in many years we've actually had an increase. So quite happy about that. And we see stability overall here in the oil and gas services, drop in some of the midstream companies, utilities obviously flat, helium flat, lithium. We had a couple of new entrants this year, and this year being the first time we've actually shown this data set, showing this in our charts. That is interesting to see. So those are the lithium brines companies. So as I mentioned here, with respect to the oil and gas reporting issuers engaged in oil and gas activities, it seems to be stabilizing. In fact, you know, we first time we actually saw a bump over the previous year since we started tracking this data here in 2012. So that is very good to see. As we dive into this, you'll see where these changes have occurred. over time. We've got the breakout here by the issuer size, so the juniors, intermediates, and seniors. Most of the change over time that we've seen in the loss of reporting issuers is through the juniors. Some of those juniors have migrated into the intermediates, and some of the intermediates have migrated into the seniors. But most of the loss is really seen in the juniors. So we've come down quite a bit over time. It used to be the majority of, or it's still the majority of our reporting issuers are juniors, but the number has actually come down quite significantly. We'll look at the market capitalization next. So we've got this data here for 3 years. And so what you'll see mostly is stability in the market caps over time. And the oil and gas activities obviously dominates the reporting issuer landscape, energy landscape in Alberta. The majority of the market cap is contained within the oil and gas activities, followed, of course, by the midstream. We have seen, actually, though, a decrease in the utilities in the last couple of years. Some of that probably related to some of the interest rate increases that have affected their trading values. With respect to the average market cap, we see that the midstream really dominates. No surprise there. Market caps of things like the lithium, helium, and the others are quite small, but they have been relatively stable. Maybe I'm lying there or exaggerating, but it's we have seen an increase though in shown here in the oil and gas activities over time. The number here at year end, actually, if we adjust this, and we will show this next year, we'll roll it forward for the full year. But at report date of September 30th, we were showing a market cap for the average market cap for the oil and gas activities of you can see the number on here of 3.6 billion, but that number actually just came off a little bit from that number by year end. So if we look at the actual groups within the reporting issuers engaged in oil and gas activities, you'll see that it has been relatively flat over time. So you can see, obviously, the seniors with their size, they dominate, getting close to $30 billion for the average company. It did come down here year to date 2023, but still relatively stable and stable across the other groups. So in terms of capital raising via prospectus, so from reporting issuers engaged in oil and gas activities, we have seen this, I'm sure everybody's aware, this long-term decline in both the amount raised and the number of offerings. Kind of, I'd say maybe since 2018, if you look at it here, it looks like maybe we've kind of fallen into a little bit of stability. We had 2017, we had a bit of a rebound in 2016 as well, a little bit, but it's sort of come off since then, but it's been relatively stable. In 2023, the year-to-date number here actually is about 500 million. But actually, when we roll it forward to the full year, which we'll show in next year's report, the total is actually about 2.6 billion. So it came up, and we had 14 offerings. So that decline kind of moderated a little bit towards in 2023. When we look at the actual breakdown of the securities type, you'll see here that there's really been a change over time. While there's less equity being raised, less actually capital being raised overall by prospectus, we really noticed in the last couple of years here was the drop off in the amount of debt being raised. We really didn't see any in 2022, and I think in 2023 there was some. I think in the fourth quarter that we'll show in next year's report, but there has been this drop off in debt. I think probably interest rate related. So companies not raising more or refinancing. So this is capital raised in the exempt market by reporting issuers engaged in oil and gas activities. So these are companies, reporting issuers that are relying on the prospectus exemption. So there's no prospectus. So think of things like private placements. So there's been less capital raised over the years. You can see here in 2017, we sort of reached this recent peak. And since then, it's dropped off. It's been actually stable overall. When you compare the two, when you overlay the capital raised in public markets, so via prospectus, that's in the dark blue, relative to this teal color, which is the exempt market, you can see over time from 2016 to 2023 how the landscape looks. And this, just for purely for comparison purposes, there were some years in there where we had the exempt market financings that were outpacing prospectus financings. But it looks like they've, overall, they've really both dropped off here in the last little while, but they have been relatively stable in the most, last few years, relatively stable, I'd say. When we turn to prospectus financing from reporting issuers involved in oil and gas services and midstream, we'll see again this drop off for both, or drop off, I should say, for oil and gas midstream in 2017. And that is more or less stabilized towards 2023. Services has been actually relatively flat throughout. And when we adjust the 2023 year-to-date numbers at September 30th and roll them forward to the full year, that number actually increased a little bit. So it took us up to almost $12 billion from 11 offerings. So bunch of financings in the last quarter of the year for the midstream companies. And I believe this is our last slide. So this one here, we've combined the utilities, the others, the helium, the lithium, just to try to show the rest of these issuers here in our wheelhouse. So capital raised via prospectus, you can see on here that it's been spotty for everybody other than the utilities. The utilities look like they came really off in 2023, but there were actually some financings in the fourth quarter that bumps that number up. But overall, in the last 4 or 5 years, it has been dropping off for the utilities again. Probably there's a bunch of different reasons for this. Some of it interest rate sensitivity, but there's probably some other things we can point to that I won't get into here that would account for that. But what we've seen, there's a little bit of we can see in 2021 a little bit of capital raised by the helium issuers, and there is some lithium here in 2023 that's been bright light for us, and so look forward to seeing where that goes. So, and that is it. So we will now turn to a wrap-up Q&A. There's a couple of things I will just mention here. One of them being, we've had a question around the professional development certificate. If that is something that you are interested in, I'll give you an email address that you can use to get your hands on those. So that's events@asc.ca, events, E-V-E-N-T at asc.ca. As I mentioned before, slides on the website today, slides with the voiceover in a week or so. We'll see if last few minutes here if we've got any questions.
Yeah, we do have a few questions, kind of more general in nature. Let's see, it would be very helpful to see the list of companies included in each of the senior, intermediate, and junior categories. Is it possible to provide that info?
So, as I guess as Ramsey alluded or mentioned in our methodology, and we've talked about it as well, how we do this, and we use the production. We take all the issuers and we take the production under 6.9 and we rank them, and then we select based on the top 50 juniors, top 20 intermediates, and top 10 seniors. There's a couple of years there where we haven't had 50 juniors with production, but if you do that ranking, you will get the issuers, and we have that data. We'll have to look into. We've had a couple of requests over the years and about providing that information. It's not. There's nothing, confidential about it. It is information taken out of some from public sources. I would encourage anybody who has any specific questions about that maybe to reach out to us, and maybe we can talk further about it.
Okay, this one kind of goes back to the section on insights into reserves estimates, and it was, do you think the negative revisions are related to the M&A activity and reallocation of capital, and is that a good thing?
I think that, I did mention that I thought that that was the case, and we're looking into this actually actively, as Richard, you can attest. I mean, we've been putting a lot of time and effort into this in the last few weeks to try to really get a better understanding of what's taking place. We've seen these technical revisions in years when there's been lots of consolidation, when there hasn't been. I think that some of it is related to consolidation and changes in development plans. But I also think some of this has to do with companies that at one time there was really this ambition around talking about drilling locations and really converting those. This idea was we're going to accelerate development. We're going to get a bunch of these wells on stream, and then we're going to refill that inventory. And then we saw companies that were sort of becoming more interested in returns to shareholders and maybe not drilling as much. And some of those locations and some of those projects maybe that were intended to see those locations drilled, hasn't happened. We're going to look into this more closely, and I think we'll hopefully be prepared. We should be prepared to talk about it more in the next year's report here, but some of the things behind it. But I would say that it is something that we're very focused on. Because we believe in the integrity of the reconciliation, the integrity of how how results should look, and that if all else being equal, we should be seeing a balancing in the positive and negative technical revisions. And so at some point in time, there's been reserves that have been attributed that have not either been haven't, I guess, been realized. And at some point in time, there's been a decision to take those technical revisions. We don't want to discourage that. If those reserves shouldn't be there, they shouldn't be there. But I think we're going to look a little more closely as to how it came to that for some issuers that stand out a little bit more than others, and try to make sure this doesn't happen. So this is part of our review process. So we'll look at it and try to understand things. But I will say that don't want to discourage companies from taking those revisions if they need to. I don't want them to think that if they actually take the revision, then we're going to be like, oh, there's a revision, we better take a look at this and maybe there's a problem. For some of these companies, there could have been a problem historically, and it's being righted by these technical revisions now. But we'll be looking closely to try to figure this all out, and we'll respond accordingly. At some time, we'll talk more about it.
Okay, good stuff. Ramsey, this one's, I think, more directed at you, but obviously Craig, weigh in if you'd like. Ramsey, do you have data on whether assurance was provided in the sustainability reports?
Yes, that is an interesting question. The short answer is yes, we do. We have seen it, and I do have some data on it. So yeah, even with voluntary disclosures, some of the issuers I've seen will have their GHG emissions disclosures audited by or assured by a third party. Unfortunately, I don't have specific numbers with me right now, but notionally speaking, it is less than about half the issuers we've sampled with Scope 1 GHG emissions that currently also have them audited by a third party. In generally, I believe there will be a limited assurance level of audit, but we have also seen some reasonable assurances on Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. But yeah, that's interesting, and it's something we may consider adding to future reports. Thank you.
Okay, that's basically, I think, all the questions we have.
Right.
Which we had a good amount of questions today. So thanks everyone for your participation.
Thank you. Thanks, Richard. Thanks to everybody for submitting. And we will, if there are questions that were really specific to issuers, we'll follow up. Hopefully we've got contact information, but if you haven't provided any, we'll try to find you, or you can perhaps you can provide it to us, just email it to us, and that brings us to the contact page here. Anytime you want to talk about energy, please reach out to us here. Very happy to engage with you. Anything we can do to help you with your disclosure, any other concerns that you have, please contact us. thanks so much for registering and attending today. And this has been wonderful. And hopefully it's been of some value. And we'll see you again. Take care.